Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Jenn Givhan, who is an author of, well, fiction author. And you know what? I'd actually like you to explain pretty much to describe what you write.
Thanks so much, Selena. Thanks for having me here. And I describe myself as a poeta and novelista or cuentista, which is a poet and a novelist, a storyteller. I write multi-genre, multi-medium, and usually try to blur genre. And actually, I don't try, it just happens that way. And so I'm a poet at heart, I think, which means that I've been writing poems since I was a very little girl. I just see the world and understand the world lyrically and through image and sound and rhythm. But I also have stories to tell. Stories of my ancestors, of my family, of the women that I grew up with in the Imperial Valley, which is a small border town on the Southern California border of Mexicali. And so I just have all of these stories that I need to tell, and they don't always confine themselves to the usually smaller space of a poem. And so several of them have grown into novels, and telling stories through novels is a passion of mine that's just growing year by year. And actually my daughter is 11 years old, have now written a middle grade novel together, as well as my adult fiction that I write, which tends toward magical realism, literary thrillers, so really page turning stories that are still poetic, I hope, line by line. So I think the best way to describe me is, as I said, poeta and novelista.
Okay, that's great. Now, your latest book, which is River Woman, River Demon,
Yes.
that's more of a magical realism, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's a literary thriller as well, which means that there is a murder at the center of it, several murders actually. And it's told by a first person unreliable narrator, but it is magical real, as are all of my books, which tend toward magical realism and surrealism. I am Latina and Indigenous, and so many of the stories of my family, my ancestors, and just my childhood growing up on the border are blurred with, the otherworldly and, what Western readers would think of as, real life. It's like there's a blurred line. And so for me, all of my stories are magical real, which means that they include elements of the magical, the otherworldly, the ghostly. Some people have described it as a paranormal ghost, a ghost story and a paranormal murder mystery. And so,
Okay. So what can readers expect from it exactly?
yeah, absolutely. So in my own life and my own practice, I am Catholic, as well as I have studied with a curandera, and I practice brujeria in my own life and my family's life. And so curanderismo and brujeria are elements of folk magic, religion, herbalism, all of these that we might consider witchcraft in Western culture, are elements of spiritual, emotional, and physical healing and kind of everyday way of life. And so this is really at the heart of my novel, River Woman, River Demon. My husband and his family and his ancestors are Black and have roots in African religion and cultural practice. And so there are elements of hoodoo as well as brujeria and indigenous wisdom in the novel. And so the family that the novel centers on, whose lives are unraveling at the beginning of the book and throughout, are practitioners of hoodoo and brujeria. And so the protagonist is named Eva, and her husband Jericho has been accused of murder. That now, she's having these strange memories and PTSD that are coming to the surface of events that happened in her childhood. And now she's very confused about who the murderer is, and even begins to suspect and doubt her own involvement in what has occurred. And so the novel tackles the the justice system, social justice issues, because he is Black and she is Latina, and they're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And as well as kind of how witchcraft and brujeria, curanderismo, hoodoo are seen by the larger society that tends to misunderstand and misrepresent them because of what they've seen in Hollywood movies, right? And just kind of mainstream. And so this takes a really incisive look into real life practices in, families that you wouldn't necessarily know or think, oh, they're witches, right? And so what does that mean to be a witch in our modern day and age? And then also it's just a really good page turning murder mystery where it's a whodunit, at its heart, but it's also, I hope, very lyrical and poetic, and will leave readers hungry for more knowledge of these cultural and spiritual folk practices of people of color.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. So what was the inspiration for it?
Oh, great question. So as I said, my family already has roots in this practice. And I also love a good thriller, and especially a thriller that has an unreliable narrator. So after I had my 2 children, I was going through quite a bit of postpartum depression and, feeling really unsettled by some of the thoughts that were going through my mind. And, because postpartum depression and even bordering on postpartum psychosis affect so many women and after childbirth and when raising their newborn and very young children, but it's often still a taboo subject and not discussed very openly. And for myself, a lot of that was fear, right? Fear of how society would judge me, or, whether I would be deemed a fit mother, because, some very disturbing things were going through my mind. But when I would read thrillers, and especially unreliable narrators and unlikable women, right, so-called, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I'm not a freak. I'm not strange, right? There are other people who are dealing with these mental health concerns. And so, and I think because there was the thriller element, I could just turn the pages and kind of escape my own reality for a while, right? While I was mothering my very young children and writing and going to school and all the different things. And so I got hooked on these. But one thing I started to notice very quickly was that I wasn't seeing very many women of color, and specifically Latina and Indigenous women. And so somehow it was like all of these women were either like from New York or from the Midwest, and they'd gone to New York, or substitute New York for London. And it was like, but basically they were mostly white. And so I set out to write my Chicana, right, my Latina and Indigenous girl on the train. So that's really what this is for me. This is like a Chicana gone girl, a Chicana girl on the train, where it gives voice and it gives space and it gives an emotional resonance and depth and really, strong characterization to a Latina and Indigenous woman who is also far from perfect. She's struggling with mental health concerns. She's struggling with PTSD. She's struggling in her marriage and with mothering and with her art. She's a glass blower, so she makes glass sculptures. And, she's struggling through all of this. And yet my hope and my deep wish for this book is that she comes across as very relatable, very human, someone that you'd want to sit down and have a chat with and get some advice from, and so showing that even those of us who are dealing with mental health concerns have so much to offer. Society has so much to offer. The world has so much wisdom and truth. And really, this book for me was about believing in myself as a woman, as a writer. I write all of my books, really, my poetry and my novels feature really complex women characters, and our society likes to flatten, maybe not likes to, but just does, right? We flatten women to the point that it's just basically two categories. It's likable and unlikable. It's like strong or weak, or whatever it is. And so to have elements of of being unlikable, so being really assertive, or being really timid, for instance, is some I've noticed that readers are sometimes get frustrated with women who don't speak up for themselves, but that's not always culturally relevant, right? It's not always culturally possible for women to be, come in and at least not at the beginning, to be strong and capable of leaving the abusive relationship, the toxic relationship, or whatever that is. She might not have the emotional, physical means or the support, right? So there's anyway, I'm going on and on, you get it. It's just that I really wanted to make sure that I was writing myself and writing the women that I've grown up with and that I've encountered clearly on the page, and giving voice to that.
Interesting. So it seems as though there is a real difference between the Latina women and white women, even though they're in the same situations.
I mean, based on cultural and familial and learned responses, learned trauma, so much of my writing, and I deal with this fervently in River Woman, River Demon, as well as my poetry collection coming out this year as well, Belly to the Brutal, that's coming out with Wesleyan University Press. The idea of wounds through the womb. And so, we're not only are we carrying our own trauma that we may have gone through as Latinas, but we're also carrying our mothers and her mothers before that and her mothers before that. And so as many women of color in the United States specifically, and so there has been so much racism, even directed toward Latinx people and Indigenous people, and we're carrying all of that. And so my books are a lot of learning how to let go of that, heal from that, heal the past. So we're healing the wounds that happened to our foremothers, as well as healing the future, right? Our daughters as well. And so I think there are crucial differences that white women don't necessarily understand, because they're not necessarily up against, and of course, it becomes so much more complex, because I know that there are white women who have grown up in poverty and grown up, in different situations that would parallel. And so I think my books speak to all marginalized people, anyone who has experienced any kind of bias against them, structural bias against them as individuals or as families. And so I hope that that's what I'm conveying through the writing as well.
Right. So what kind of research went into writing, it?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I am a writer, and so I'm not actually a glass blower. So I researched quite a bit into Eva's art, and that was a lot of fun, finding out about how she makes the sculptures in the book, which I go into quite a bit of detail because she has a glass blowing shop on the premises where she lives on a ranch in Los Lunas, which is right outside of Albuquerque. And so there was quite a bit into that, as well as the justice system. So, I had to research into practices in New Mexico specifically. But then I also was doing some background research into a fuller perspective of hoodoo and brujeria and curanderismo beyond my own family and beyond my own individual practice. And so one book that I found very helpful and went to quite a bit was, let's see, Roots, Bones, Sticks, and Stones. Or is it stick? Let me find it. Sticks, Stones. Okay, Sticks, Stones, Roots, and Bones by Stephanie Rose Bird. And so she's actually an expert in hoodoo. And so a lot of the book itself is about how each family has their own practice, and it's very individual magic, and it comes from within. It comes from family tradition and practice. So, I could rely on what my own family has experienced, but I wanted to make sure, because I also feel that there's this onus to write culture, respectfully as well. I wanted to make sure that I was doing the Hoodoo community justice. And so I did quite a bit of research into the larger magical community, which was really fun. And we were able to bring some of those practices into our own home, which was really beautiful.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out River Woman, River Demon?
Oh, the challenges are myriad for all writers, and specifically writers of color, especially if we're writing stories that don't follow any kind of mainstream trajectory and we're blurring genres. I would say that for me, always at this point in my life and in my writing career, the challenge is really doing all of this without the financial support that I really need. I'm a mom of two kids, it's a tween and a teen, and I'm an adjunct at a community college, and I do all kinds of it's a gig economy, right? And I do pick up gigs everywhere that I can, editing, coaching. And so really just finding the time, the energy, and the resources to be able to write these stories and fight for them can get difficult. But, I keep applying for grants and really just hanging on to hope that eventually I'll get to a place where I'm able to make money, through my writing, money that supports me as a writer, because it's my passion and it's what I want to do full time. If I could, I would write just all day, every day, and, Stephen King it, in terms of several books a year, but it's just hard to find the time and money to be able to do that.
And it's not really, writing is not really a very lucrative job unless you really, write 10 books a year or something.
Right. For most of us, yeah, a couple of people have done it, but
yeah, some people do, which is fantastic. Yeah. Oh wow, it's a tough field. It's a very tough field.
It is.
So,
yeah. All I can think of is that there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. I teach writing, and if there was anything else I'd rather be doing, it's teaching people right. How to do it as well, and I do that as well. But at the end of the day, writing is what I absolutely love. It's what I've wanted to do since I was a very little girl. If you'd asked me when I was 5 or 6, I knew I was going to be a writer. At 16, 17, I was going to be a writer. I'm 38 and I'm a writer. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, I think a lot of writers are the same. They say when they're little children, that's what they want to do. They want to write.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So what else can we expect from you in the future?
Ooh, that's a great question. So like I said, my daughter and I have written a middle grade book, Pi Luna and the Shadow Beast of the Forsaken. And we've just signed with an agent, Rebecca Friedman, and we're very excited about that. So we're revising it to send out to publishers right now as we speak. And I've also gotten back to work on a novel, another magical real thriller set on the Salton Sea, which is here in Southern California, about 2 hours away from where I'm currently living in San Diego. It's called Salt Bones, and it will investigate the Salton Sea in the Southern California border, which is drying up. And as a result, right, the toxic pesticides from the agricultural waste that have been draining into it for 50 years or more are beginning to come up to the surface now as particulate matter and get into the lungs of all of the people, mostly Hispanic, Mexican population in the Imperial Valley. And so I'm going to investigate the ecological practices there alongside the story of the missing and murdered girls on the border. And so just like all of my books, it's going to blur genre, but I have a real heart and a passion for the stories and making sure that I tell these stories.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have some questions for you about being a writer. What's your favorite part of being a writer? Since you said you love writing, on the whole writing and publishing process.
There's this magic that happens when I have a story idea and I've sat down and I've talked with my family about it. My husband is an avid reader and storyteller, and he and I will sit and he'll listen to my stories for hours on end, which is amazing, and I'm so grateful. And so we'll have just talked it all out. Or I'll talk about it with my kids. And then I sit down to write, and there's just this magic that happens when the characters start talking back, and the world just starts emerging. And it feels really like the creative power that, I find through mothering, right? And not power, but strength is really what I mean, the resilience, right? And that I can sometimes lose and forget in our capitalist, often racist and ableist society. So I often will get down on myself being a fat, disabled woman of color in society, right, who can't find a job, essentially. But when I'm a writer, right, and it's like the world is mine, the world that I'm creating, right? And I feel like a true badass mother, when I'm writing. And so that's the kind of strength and resilience that I can then take with me into my life. And I feel like there's debate about whether writing should be therapy or not, but I often find that writing is therapy, very much so, and that it's not any lesser or any less like dignified or qualified to be literature if it is therapy. And it's very healing for me, very therapeutic. So I love that aspect of it and the strength that it brings me.
That's great. Yeah, I know a lot of people do journaling, and that's writing,
Exactly.
and it's therapy. Yeah.
So valid. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Oh, I love that question. So my first novel, Trinity Site, is a post-apocalypse with a twist. It takes place in New Mexico, and a woman named Calliope wakes up to her home in Albuquerque being a desolate wasteland, and she can't find her family. And she sets out to find out what's happened and where her family has gone. And while writing and researching this novel, I was traveling all around New Mexico to all the different places that Calliope goes to, like the City of Rocks, and just all of the sacred indigenous sites, as well as archaeological sites. And my children were very young at the time that I started writing it, and they were growing up as I was writing this book. And so my Calliope, my protagonist, is pregnant with twins, and she's also they're the little neighbor girl Yunjun, who has also lost her family, and she's about 5 years old or so. And so she's taking Yunju to find her family as well. And so as I was writing Calliope and thinking about, okay, what is it like when she has to pick up Yunju and run, or when she's running with this big, heavy belly full of her babies, right? What does that experience physically feel like, so I can write it? And I would pick up my daughter and run around the house with her, or we were out in the out in the scrub and brush of New Mexico, and I would have her on my back and just be like lumbering around with her, so that I could hold on to those sensations to write them in my story. And so actually physically, I wasn't saying encompassing, I can't even think of the word right now, but embodying, there we go. Embodying the story, right, as a mother, was probably one of just the best experiences as a writer that I've ever had. And then even there's a monster in the book, and it really became a family affair. And so we were trying to find the word to describe how this monster would move. And so eventually we came up with the word gamboling. He was gamboling, but like, I just remember my family and I, trying to gambol around the house, and like, what, how would this monster be moving? We were just physically like acting out the scenes. And I hold that very close to my heart. And as you can see with all of my books, that's just one example of Trinity Site, but all of my books end up becoming family affairs. And even though they're meant for adults, except for the middle grade that I'm writing with my daughter, so my children can't necessarily know the full plot and all of the details. I share with them what they can, with what I can, and they very much become a part of my process.
Wow. So what piece of advice would you want to give other writers, or and what is the greatest lesson that you've learned that you want to give, advice?
Yeah,
The writers
just
do.
don't give up. Just don't give up. You have these stories within you for a reason, right? They were gifted to you and they're yours, and only you can tell them in your voice, right? And so we all have truths within us that belong to us and are nobody else's. And so the world will try to squash our voices and our truths and our stories in every which way, but never, ever, ever give up. And so there will be, many doors that close, but I often go find a window, go find a fire escape and climb up the fire escape and, knock out a window to get inside. And then once you get inside, fling open the doors for others. And that's often what's happened for me as well. I actually had an agent for quite a long time who dropped me and my daughter, and that was heartbreaking. And a fellow writer, Erica T. Worth, whose books I love and whom I love, she has a book called White Horse coming out this year, and we're going to do a reading together. Check her out. She's an Indigenous writer, writing amazing, powerful stories. She told me about her agent, Rebecca Friedman, and so gave me her contact information, and we talked to her, and over the past few months have been discussing, and we finally just signed with her the other day. And so I've been dancing. My daughter and I have been dancing with joy, but that was a major door slammed in our faces, and it was heartbreaking. And even at this stage in my career, 5 full-length poetry books, multiple awards, 3 novels published with a major publisher, and still, like career-altering setbacks can occur. But by creating those connections with other writers that are built on true respect and camaraderie and, affection for each other, where it's not about competition, it's just about joy and uplifting each other, especially marginalized writers, finding your people, right? So once you find that fire escape and you get in, it's so important to fling open the doors for others. So just never give up. Keep opening doors and keep creating connections with your fellow writers and those in the publishing world, meaningful connections and friendships. And I think that you can absolutely make this writing life work for you.
Great. Okay. I have a couple of questions here. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, of course, because we can order your books, and you can order books from us by calling us at 508-796-5613 or email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So where else can people find your books?
Oh, that's a great question. JenniferGivhan.com. So that's my website, and Givhan is Givhan, and I think it'll probably be in the info at the bottom of this video. So that's my website. And then Blackstone is where Blackstone Publishing is where all of my novels have been published. So you can check with them as well. And then, they're on bookshop.org and basically wherever books are sold, you can find my novels. Yeah. And I'm not going to name the online retailer that you could get books from. Don't get books from them. Get them from Annie's bookstore instead. Bookstop.
Okay, and how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Yeah, so you can sign up for my newsletter at jennifergivhan.com, and on that homepage as well, you can sign up for my newsletter and get a sneak peek of the first chapter of River Woman, River Demon. So that is a really cool and exciting thing that I'm giving you all for free, anyone who signs up for my newsletter right now. And I'm also on social media. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and I'm Jenn Givhan at all of those places.
Wonderful. Okay. I just have a couple of quick questions. Like, what are some of your passions? And how do you make time for your hobbies and things that you love?
Ah, I don't have a lot of time.
And we don't have much time left in the interviews.
Yeah. What are my passions? Being outside in nature, going to the beach, right? And really just reconnecting with nature, because it is so easy, right, to lose a sense of groundedness and just to feel kind of adrift in the social media world and, and just kind of forget what and where our roots are. And so spending time, especially with family, but even by myself, right, out in nature and getting my feet in the dirt and even sometimes my hands in the dirt, right, listening to the trees, listening to the birds. I would say that that's one of my biggest passions. And right now I pretty much have time for hanging out with my family and taking care of them, writing, and then I guess resting in nature is my passion.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, that's been a lifelong discovery, that rest, and recharging can be so, beautiful and freeing and necessary, as well as absolutely okay to do, right? And I'm no longer calling myself lazy, because that's what our capitalist society might have called me, lazy, right? If I'm just hanging out, right? But how do we, especially as writers, recharge and have time for the next stories or the current stories and our works in progress to percolate, and all of the creative juices to come together in the psyche, if we're not leaving time for curiosity and just simple joys and wonder and staring off into space and daydreaming or sleeping and actually dreaming. So sleep is one of my passions right now, and I fight for my sleep really hard, tooth and nail fight for my rest and my sleep.
That sounds like a great idea. Well, thank you so much, Jenn Givhan. And if you ever do get to Boston area or Worcester area, we'd love to have you come and visit our store.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. This is a beautiful space you've curated for writers, and I'm so grateful.
Okay. Thank you. And it was great having you. Okay. Bye.